Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Free agency is upon us, so we're going to set the stage. The Steelers do make a move to create cap space, but plenty of big questions left out there. Who can the Steelers get? How much money will they have? What things do they have to prioritize first in free agency? We'll answer all that, and we are going to blitz through several of your call-in questions because you guys have been asking a lot, and I haven't been able to get to them. A lot of that, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. More on them later. All right, Steelers fans, lots to discuss. We're going to get to the wide receiver stuff in a bit, but we got to talk about the things the Steelers have actually done. They have made a move to free up more cap space, and I'll clarify what that is here. Now, this announced from Jerry Dulac of the Post-Gazette. The Steelers restructured the deal with Cole Holcomb, the linebacker that they signed 2 years ago in free agency. He hasn't played for about a year and a half because of an injury he suffered in the 2023 season. But he was entering the final year of his deal, and apparently they're converting some of that money to signing bonus money. He was a $7.6 million cap hit. According to Jerry Dulac, this is going to be a $5 million savings in salary cap space. So what does that mean? Well, according to what overthecap.com has the Steelers slated at right now, the Steelers before that move have $59.6 million in cap space. So if it's about $5 million, or he says it's almost $5 million, let's say 4.9, let's just round up and say it's a $5 million savings. That will put the Steelers at around $64.6 million in cap space that they have, and they still haven't cut Larry Ogunjobi, which is the move I thought would be coming already, but it hasn't happened yet, so we'll see what goes on there. But that if they were to let go of Larry Ogunjobi, that would put them over $70 million in cap space that they would have with that, combining with what they've already done and what they need to do moving forward. The Steelers have the ability to make some big moves, and I do think that they're setting themselves up to make a big run here. But you're probably wondering, well, Chris, what's going on here? Why aren't they doing these things? Because there's a lot of stuff happening out here. There's trades being made. There's tags being made. People are signing it. There's all these different things happening. Guys are re-signing. Guys are being cut. Guys are being put out for trades, and the Steelers aren't getting in on it. In fact, one of the guys we talked about yesterday that was about to be released, Christian Kirk, was on his way out. They filed the paperwork, but the Texans jump in front of the Jaguars before they release, and they say, hey, we'll give you a next year's 7th round pick, and he's off to the Texans. So Christian Kirk's actually off the market, not a player available. And now we have a trade price on that's supposedly out there from Diana Rossini of The Athletic, who says that DK Metcalf, the Seahawks want a first and a third for him to move him there. And DK Metcalf saying he wants a $30 million a year contract. So those are on the table. So now the Steelers know what those things are. But you're probably wondering, okay, why haven't the Steelers made moves yet? I think it's because they are trying to solidify the quarterback situation before anything else. And that is what the key is. They want to figure out who their quarterback is so that they can then figure out what receivers they need to go get so they can figure out everything else and how to prioritize the rest of the spending around that. Now, as we've talked about with Nick Farabaugh, with Alan Saunders, with Mike DeFable, we've talked about this for over a month now about how this is going to be an interesting negotiation period, and it's now coming to a head because next week on Monday, that's when things start opening up. The tampering period begins, and then we are beginning the real stages of free agency where teams can start to talk to other players and come to agreements and things like that. And that's what I think Justin Fields' agents are trying to see, if they can get the Steelers to get them to a number that they like before that period. And then if the Steelers want to sign Justin Fields, and every indication we have here at Locked On Steelers is that the Steelers are prioritizing signing Justin Fields, but they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. If Justin Fields in his camp does, kind of holds things out and then all of a sudden get snatched up by another team that wants to offer him big money. The Steelers then would probably go with Russell Wilson or, create some other alternative plan here. But that's the big holdup here, is they're trying to figure that out. Now, I've been saying for a while, I think that the range for Justin Fields should be anywhere from 15 to 20 million. I'm sure the Steelers are trying to work it down less than that, but that's the range that I think that you're looking at there as far as spending on him for the upcoming season, and maybe like a 2-year deal at that rate that the Steelers would go for. But the thing is that behind that, you have to make several other moves, and that's what the Steelers are getting set for. Now, as I said before, Christian Kirk is now off the table, and I talked about that with Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith on the Afternoon Drive podcast. Go check them out; they do amazing work. And I was on there for their Thursday Afternoon Drive show, and I was like, yeah, like, listen, I don't know what all goes on in the background, but that sounds like the Texans were just like, they just jumped on and they said, we're not going to let Christian Kirk hit free agency. We're just going to go get that guy. And now they're trading for him. And I do think if the Steelers really wanted Christian Kirk, they dropped the ball on that. But we got to see what the Steelers actually want to do there. If Omar Khan has other things in mind, and if maybe that wasn't the wide receiver that they wanted, maybe they have another move in mind, maybe they have other priorities in mind. But that's the thing that we have to wonder here. What are the priorities here? Now, again, with Holcomb restructured, that kind of signals that they plan on keeping him around at least for this season to see where things at. Otherwise, they would have just straight up cut him, and it would have been $7 million instead of $5 million that they saved. So I think that's going to complete the linebacker room. They won't need to really invest in that at all in this offseason. But as we've said, I think that the big free agent spending group areas that they attack here are D-line, wide receiver, and maybe D-line and corner first, and then maybe wide receiver after that, and maybe wide receiver comes before that. But I think it's going to be about taking what's there and finding who's the best available that best fits you and is willing to take reasonable money to join your team. And frankly, I think Christian Kirk's off the table. If the price is anything that's more than I think a 3rd-round pick for DK Metcalf, I'm sorry, but I'm out there. And I know some people are like, well, wait a minute, I love DK Metcalf, and he could be a top 10 wide receiver. Yeah, you know what? But he's a top 10 wide receiver that you're giving up that you're giving up serious draft capital for and paying to be a top tier wide receiver at the same time, when you're going to need to figure out what you're doing with George Pickens. Now, if your idea is you're going to trade for DK Metcalf and then send away George Pickens, then maybe, but I have to think that if you're trading for that guy, you don't want to give up one of your building block pieces, because make no mistake, right now the Steelers, they are not a superstar wide receiver away from being Super Bowl champions or Super Bowl contenders. They're putting together building blocks to become that team so that they can get there in another year or two. I think if they are able to hit in the right ways, like this offensive line has to mature, but now this year they need to go invest in the defensive line. They need to invest in wide receiver. They need to invest in corner, guys that can be building block pieces moving forward, that can set the stage for that. If they're able to hit a quarterback in the draft in the next 1 or 2 years after this one, because I don't think this is the year to do that, then if they have an offensive line, a run game, the defense is still rocking, and they have a couple playmakers on offense for the quarterback to trust, you can be that hot shot team. You can be like a Commanders team that rises up. And granted, you'll probably have a lot more things going for you if the defense is still playing at a high level. And again, you're getting younger on that side too, because you're drafting a defensive tackle probably in the 1st round this year. So there's space for the Steelers to do what they want to do this year, and they can be aggressive. And I want to talk about that because there's some really good questions out there as far as what you guys asked. We have 6 questions we're going to try to get to all here on this show. We got questions about free agency, questions about George Pickens. People got some heat about George Pickens because people don't feel like he's being misunderstood. Other free agent targets, what the Steelers offense should look like. All that's going to be here in the upcoming segments here. So stick around for that, because we have a lot to discuss here. But the bottom line is the Steelers right now, and I would expect this news to come either like today, tomorrow, or Sunday, but expect the Steelers to announce a quarterback move, or for a quarterback move to happen at some point. When that happens, we will have reactions here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't you worry about it. What I'm doing right now is setting the stage, is that once quarterback happens, that's when the ball's going to start rolling, and you're going to start to see the Steelers either cut other guys, restructure guys, and start to make serious moves and get ready to be in position for trading for the players they want. Like, for example, I don't think they'll trade for DK Metcalf if the price is like a 1st-round pick, but they might trade for Cortland Sutton. And I've been saying that for a while, that I think that he would be an ideal trade situation because he wouldn't cost as much as DK Metcalf. He could be another He could be a guy to pair with George Pickens, and I think that that's something that could work out for the future. But again, plenty to do here. Priority is get the quarterback situated. We'll see if the Steelers can do that this weekend before free agency starts to open up next week. So we got a lot of your questions coming up. We'll get to that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Did your question get answered on the Locked On Steelers hotline? We'll find out next here as we continue the show. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just beginning on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because FanDuel is your home on NBA live betting, so even if you missed the first few minutes of the game or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can just make your picks from the first whistle until the final buzzer with FanDuel. Plus, you can even combine your live bets with a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to play, now is the perfect time to join. New FanDuel customers get started with $150 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here today, and we start to take your calls. Now, I do apologize because, as you guys know, you can always call into the show to leave your question. Be sure to call 412-223-6644. When you call, leave your name, where you're from. Try to keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get your question on the show. A lot of you guys have been calling. I have been able to do it since we're on the I was at the Combine, and then the reactions to the Combine. We're playing interviews, and we still have more interviews that we're going to bring into the show eventually. But with free agency heating up, wanted to focus on that. And now that we have a kind of a brief hiatus before free agency start, like a calm before the storm, I figured let me knock out some of the questions that you guys have been sending, because you guys have had some really good questions. Let's get it started with Turk from Hastings, Pennsylvania, who has a questions about how the Steelers could handle free agency. Turk, take it away.
Hi, Chris. This is Turk from Hastings, PA. Hey, I was thinking that rather than the Steelers making one big splash in free agency on the defensive line, why not try to do a 2-for-1 where they go after a couple defensive linemen in that area of like a Bobby Brown from the Rams plus somebody else? You know, instead of spending 10, 14 million on one guy, we get two guys at about 6 to 7 million each. You could still draft a guy in the draft, and you got Logan Lee coming in from last year. You could do a whole reface of this defensive line in one off season. So thank you for taking my call. I'll hang up and wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you for your question, Turk. As always, it's 412-223-6644 to get your question on your show. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute. Turk, let's get into this. So I hear you on building up the depth, because that's what you're signing up for if you're trying to sign a guy in free agency right now. You're signing up for a guy that's going to be a depth complement to this defensive line. Also, this all changes, right, if the Steelers don't cut Larry Ogunjobi, which they haven't done yet. I still think that they're going to, because they should. But the options there, like you got Javon Hargrave, I imagine he would be one of those more expensive pieces you're thinking about not signing. But I personally think that they would have a decent chance to get a guy that wouldn't cost them, you know, a super duper contract to keep around, like Tershawn Wharton, the guy out from the Chiefs. He's been the guy that I think that if they can pay him around $8 to $10 million, that's worth it. And remember, the Steelers right now probably have about $63-64 million in cap space. You know, you imagine after you sign a quarterback, but maybe that's to chop about 20 off of that. But if you cut Larry Ogunjobi, you get that up to 70. So let's say that after they cut Ogunjobi, and then they sign a quarterback, they have $50 million. Well, then you can spend on a few guys like that. You can get a Tershawn Wharton and then go down the list and, you know, find like, you know, a Chris Williams or a Miles Adams or someone down that list that you're thinking about there. But I think the key here is the Steelers have an opportunity to get solid veterans to give them solid depth at key positions that they need depth at. You look back at that defensive front that the Eagles had in the playoffs to help them win the Super Bowl. They didn't have just depth guys. They had guys like Milton Williams coming off the bench to bring fresh legs in. And Will Williams is like now one of your probably your preferred interior pass rushers that's in this free agency class because they can't afford to pay him. And I think that's what the Steelers have to go get. They have to go get one of those guys and then get a depth guy. But I like your idea here to kind of spread the money around, and I think that they will a bit. I don't think they're going to overspend at one position and spend like $20 million on a single player. I think that they have the ability to stretch this money out. I also think that they're going to go look at cornerback because that is another position that the Steelers are going to look at. And in fact, we got Bruce, who asked a while back, long before free agency was about to start. And because again, some of these questions are a bit older. We apologize for the ones we don't get to right away. But I want to throw this to Brute in Fort Cavazos, Texas. Bruce asked about one cornerback in specifically that could help the slot position. Here's Bruce.
Hey, Chris. It's Bruce from Fort Cavazos, Texas. Big fan of the show. And I was watching your Tuesday episode, and it gave me a thought I wanted to run by you as a free agency target that maybe we should have that people are overlooking. So we just picked up Gerald Alexander from the Raiders, and I know he's more of a safeties guy, but it brought a name to mind, Nate Hobbs. Nate Hobbs played slot corner for them, big in helping in the run game, did really good covering. I know when we played him, he was able to have some pass disruptions against Freiermuth, against Pickens, tackling Najee at the goal line for a loss. He's a guy who's just a very solid slot corner, and we haven't had that since Mike Hilton. And I think I've seen that he's projected to get $2.4 to $4 million in terms of a contract. And so considering his ties to Gerald Alexander coming in, what are your thoughts on bringing a guy like Nate Hobbs in to maybe solidify that corner room and make it less of a draft need this year? Thanks for what you do. Look forward to watching your next episode.
Thank you, Bruce. And sorry it took me so long to get to this question, but it's a great question. Again, you can call in like Bruce did at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute. I like the idea of getting Nate Hobbs, and we brought him up on this show before. I think he'd be a heck of an addition. He gives you some flexibility. He's also a bigger slot guy. He's 6'1", 195. So he can run. That's why he can run with a Pat Freiermuth, because he has a little bit more size to him. He's not an undersized slot guy. He's a guy that can run with those guys. Now, looking back at his past year, he had three pass breakups and an interception on the year. Didn't really get burned, never got called for a penalty. I think that's a guy that you can certainly look at there. And Gerald Alexander, I know that he was the safeties coach for the Raiders, but don't sell him short. I think that he's a guy, they're bringing him back to the Steelers because he can do the different positions, and it's just kind of like what they prioritized him with in Las Vegas for a year. But I think he's going to be brought back because he's going to challenge the secondary a bit. So getting Nate Hobbs, I think, is a great addition idea, because then you can solidify that slot cornerback position, like you said. And then here's the thing. If you have Nate Hobbs and you have Beanie Bishop, you're right. You don't have to go after slot corner in the draft class. And that solidifies that. And so now, and Nate Hobbs being one of those cheaper signings, as Turk was suggesting at getting a defensive line, Nate Hobbs is one of those signings that you probably don't spend that much on. You can get him, and then he's a solid fit. And then all of a sudden, that's a nice bargain move there to solidify a position on your roster with a solid veteran. You have a younger player behind him that's learning. So if whenever Nate Hobbs' contract runs out, or if Beanie Bishop surpasses him at some point, you can be excited. You can move that guy on, but that gives you flexibility there. So I'm all on board on the Nate Hobbs idea and making that happen. And especially because if you get Nate Hobbs in the slot for cheap, you can still go get a Charvarius Ward, or Carlton Davis, a Byron Murphy, somebody at a big splash at cornerback, which is what I really think the Steelers really want to do. I think that they want to go get a guy who can be a difference maker on the outside to line up across from Joey Porter Jr. And then that way, if they go into the draft and look, if a cornerback falls to them that they really think is awesome and they think is a great fit, then they can draft him, and then that guy can develop behind the vets. But this way, their secondary can be set, and they can be a much more aggressive man coverage unit than they were for most of last season. So that's something that I think certainly the Steelers could address there. I want to throw one more question here before we get to the break here. This question comes from Aaron in Miami, Florida. He asked this a little bit back, but asking a depth draft question that I think would be interesting. Aaron, take it away.
Hey, Chris, this is Aaron in Miami, Florida. Big fan of the show. Enjoy your analysis. I wanted to talk to you and ask you about the Steelers building through the trenches. We've heard a lot about the defensive line, but what do you think about them taking a tackle potentially in the middle rounds, particularly with Dan Moore leaving? There would be a need for a swing tackle, and of course, potentially could be Broderick Jones insurance. So just wanted to hear your take on that and any potential targets we should keep an eye out for. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate your call. As always, 412-223-6644. So I hear you on that. And I actually think that's something the Steelers probably are keeping on their radar. They also might just sign a tackle in free agency. But it's something the Steelers are looking at, just not early. Now, I'll also tell you right now, if you go to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I believe it should be up by the time this episode is up and running. I've done my cornerback big board. I had to do an offensive line big board as well on this NFL draft class. Now, granted, this was a combined big board picking like the top 10 guys that I think could fall to the Steelers at some point in the draft across the offensive line. So this was centers, guards, and tackles. Lots of tackles because this is a tackle-heavy draft. The guards don't really start to poke up, I think, until like the second round. The top center, I think, is not even like a guy that you consider until like the mid or late second round. But as far as tackles, I do think there's some options out there. If you wanted to get like aggressive with it and get a guy like in the second round, Ozzie Trapolo out of Boston College is a name that I think, because he's huge. But I think a sweet spot guy that could be interesting is Braden Crenshaw Dixon out of Florida, simply because he has a really big frame. He's like 6'6", 6'7". He graded well this past year. He looked like he was a solid player, and he's 24 years old. He was a redshirt senior, so he had a lot of experience. Guys like that, I think, could be the option that you're looking for there, or a Chase Lunt out of UConn, just bigger tackle guys that you can say like, hey, you know what? If Broderick Jones doesn't work out, this is another depth piece. Or if him or Furtado get hurt, you have another young guy that you're bringing up in the mix and moving forward. But I do think that's something the Steelers are looking at. I don't think that they're not looking at that, but it's one of those things where they're weighing that against the other options that are going to be available to them in the middle rounds, like running back, receiver. Do they get a depth cornerback there? Do they try to go get a safety? Is that where they go get their quarterback, like Will Howard? A lot of different options there. So there's plenty of guys out there. I think that there's size in this draft class that you could go get a guy like that. I think they could also, afford to go get, a backup center if they wanted for the long term. They can go get, another guard to work with Mason McCormick for the future. There's a lot of options there. If you want to see some of those options, go to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Look for my top 10 my big board of the top 10 offensive linemen the Steelers could be considering to draft in this draft class. Some of them guys I don't think they will actually pick, but just ranking guys after like the obvious guys that are going to pick at the top of the draft, like Will Campbell, and going through that. So we want those answers, go to there. But to answer your question there, Aaron, I think I would like look at a type of a player like Brandon Crenshaw Dixon out of Florida. Just I think that's a big offensive tackle to train and develop and be a guy on your roster for the next 4 years. Certainly something the Steelers I think should have on their radar, and I think they do have on their radar as a potential option. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we continue to answer your questions, including one caller who got some heat for me on George Pickens and the way we've been talking about him. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, stick with us. We'll be right back. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our episode here answering your calls on the call line. Like I said, we got one caller who got some heat, and this is Jerome from Memphis, who does not feel the criticisms that have been levied against George Pickens. Jerome, take it away.
Hey, Chris. This is Jerome out of Memphis, Tennessee, big Steelers fan. I want to say, why do you want to get rid of George Pickens so bad? You talk about George Pickens like he shot somebody. George Pickens is 21 years old. He's not going to be Cam Haywood. If you ever play sports, everybody in the locker room is not going to be TJ Watt. He is a young kid growing up. Give him some grace. We got rid of Juju Smith because we said he didn't take it serious. He just won a Super Bowl ring, almost was going to win, had a chance to win too. We got to stop hating on these young receivers because they don't act like Cam Haywood. A lot of them don't as soon as they start getting good. Calm down, Pittsburgh Steelers, and you calm down, Chris.
my man Jerome, calm down, Chris. I feel you. Listen, Jerome, I don't hate George Pickens. I'm talking about moving on from him because there are indications that the Steelers aren't sure if they're going to sign him long term. I'm not saying the Steelers should absolutely just move on from him. I think that the thing is that when you look at George Pickens, he's not 21 anymore. You can say that when he was a rookie. He's just turned 24 years old. And now is the time that he's supposed to show some maturity, grow a little bit, and be able to be that guy that's not late to a big game day against the Chiefs like he was this year. He needs to, and also in the same game that he was late for, he was crashing out on the field and I think drew a flag because he was taking off his helmet and yelling out of frustration, and again in a way that he had to kind of be restrained for. I think the reason why like a lot of people bring this up, and listen, I'm saying this because I'm hearing this as well from other people, that there's a chance that the Steelers are trying to move on from George Pickens. Now, to the credit of George Pickens, to credit of the Steelers, they have given every indication that they're not doing this. Like George Pickens is like, yeah, good luck with that. He posted about it on Instagram and kind of said like, that's fake news that he's going to be moving on. The Steelers there's been plenty of reports the Steelers have not given the public indication that they're trading George Pickens or anything like that. But the question is that if you're building an offense, if you're building a new locker room and you have leadership questions, there's no bona fide leader of this offense the way that there are TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minkah Fitzpatrick on defense, Patrick Queen. You don't have the leadership structure on offense that you do on defense. So if you sign a guy like George Pickens for the long-term money, you need that guy to be part of your leadership. That's why I think Pat Freiermuth got paid when he did, because Pat Freiermuth is a positive influence. He's always there. He's always working. He's not something you have to question. And that's one thing you work with there. They want George Pickens to be that guy. He just hasn't been that guy. And I think that's the thing. And again, like, I'm not saying that George Pickens can't grow and mature and learn like anybody else. I've been in Pittsburgh where I thought Juju Smith-Schuster got too much heat. In fact, on this show, I used to say, man, y'all are giving him too much grief for a TikTok dance that has zero impact on the game. Like that's the kind of stuff I don't care about. Like, it's like, what you do on your own time, how you celebrate, as long as you don't get the flag on the team, that's fine. Like that's not where I think the problem lies with the Steelers. And there's plenty of guys in the past that have gotten that. I always thought Juju Smith-Schuster was overly blamed because a lot of people didn't like the culture that he brought because he was just, more free and wasn't rigid and didn't have this way about him. I think George Pickens, it's a little different though, because Juju Smith-Schuster was not late to games as far as I knew when he was with the Steelers. But when George Pickens is late there, when you had a problem last year when he wasn't blocking for Jaylen Warren, that's a little bit different. Jerome, if we're being honest, and I'm being honest with you, because I hear you that there are people out there that criticize players, I think overly. I remember when Le'Veon Bell was playing really well for the Steelers, and he used to point after a first down, like that's my first down. I remember Steelers saying, "No, that's terrible. You shouldn't do something like that." And I'm like, what's the problem here? Like, everybody has like a little thing that they do, and it didn't stop him from being good, right? So I don't think that's the issue here. But I think that the reason that I bring up that they could or should or will move on from George Pickens is because this is now crunch time. And this past year, he did not have the blow up kind of year that he was supposed to. So I think it is a question on how they're going to handle it this year. I don't think the Steelers, and you can answer this for yourself, Jerome, but would you prefer the Steelers to just let him hit free agency next year if they don't want to sign him long term? And if they do want to sign him long term, great. I just want to see, do they actually want to do that, and how do they get that done? If they sign him long term, what's the message there? Because I think George Pickens, if he stepped up more as a leader last year, if he was, one of those leading guys, one of those leading voices, if he took more accountability when things went wrong, I think then they probably would have tried to get this done already. This would have been a foregone conclusion. No one's wondering about that. But now I do think it's a question. Again, I don't want to run him off. I don't dislike George Pickens. I think that he is a hardworking player. I think that he is a guy that gets misunderstood. I was one of the people that thought that when he was getting blamed for in the snow game against Cleveland, when he got into the fight at the end of the game, I thought he was defending himself because on the last play of the game in the Hail Mary, he just got tackled while the ball was in the air, and no one cared, and so he was like, well, if y'all ain't going to defend me, I'm going to defend myself. I think there's moments like that where George Pickens gets way too much heat for those things. But when not blocking for Jaylen Warren, late for a game, kind of, and in the same game that you're late for, then you're crashing out at the end of the game, not being a good teammate. Those are the type of things I think he needs to mature on. And I think it's those type of things that give the Steelers pause before signing him to a long-term deal. Remember, he's not 21 no more. He's not a rookie no more. He's entering his 4th year in the NFL. He needs to show that maturity and that growth, and I think that's the big thing the Steelers really need from him before they sign him to a long-term deal. I'm not completely ruling it out, but there's a lot of people, and I work on this beat. I have a lot of people on this show. You guys know I work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I work with all the guys over there. We do the North Shore Drive podcast over there. There's a lot of people who you talk to across the board, and most reporters do not feel like George Pickens is long to be with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm not saying that he definitely won't be, but there's almost a consensus opinion that they are not going to give him a long-term extension. Now, maybe the answer is they play him throughout this year and they franchise tag him next year and they deal with that situation and they just cross those bridges when they get there. But if we're being honest about how the contract situation is, there's no guarantee that they're going to give him big money there. So that's the whole reason there, Jerome. It's not a hate thing. It's not a I want them to get rid of him thing. I'm not trying to run him out of town. Trust me, I've seen plenty of Steelers players wanted to be run out of town, and I've been a person that says like y'all might not want to do that. Like I've been saying about Najee Harris. I've been saying like y'all might not want to see Najee Harris just get up out of here, because I think that if this offensive line develops, he could be really good behind it and be a talented guy. And heck, he's gotten over 1,000 yards every year he's been with the Steelers without a good offensive line and without really good quarterback play. So I'm not one to run a guy out of town unless it's like Cam Sutton. That's a different story. He played terribly this year. He got to go. George Pickens, I see the talent there and I see the potential for growth, but he's got to show that himself. And I think that's what the team is waiting on. All right, we got a couple more questions here. We're going to try to pound through real quick. Here's Noah from 29 Palms, California.
Hey, Chris. Noah from 29 Palms, California. I had a question about the Steelers' offensive identity. We've heard the entire season Mike Tomlin say that he wants to be a run-heavy team that dictates time of possession, and from that, the points will come. And it occurred to me, watching the playoff game against the Ravens, is that their offense was everything that we want it to be. They were running heavy, keeping time of possession, throwing when they needed to, keeping our offense off the field, and exhausting our defense. So my question is, are we just a running back or a mobile quarterback away from having this be our reality? Or do we actually need to focus on maybe changing what our identity is as a team? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Noah. That's a good question, and I appreciate that. Again, 412-223-6644 to call in, like Noah and Jerome and everyone else who's called in for this show. Noah, I want to point back to something that I said before they played the Philadelphia Eagles and why I picked them to lose to the Eagles this year. Because, again, the Steelers are trying to be like the Eagles. They're a team that has a really good offensive line. They have the best running back in football. I'm not saying the Steelers should just go out and get that guy like an Ashton Jeanty this year. But I think the Steelers are a team that they're trying to get to that point. And the reason I said that they were going to lose to the Eagles was because they're trying to grow their fronts to be like the Eagles as they are now. The Eagles started this process for them years ago. And they have these guys that have developed, that have become these stalwart guys, and they have the fronts to play that way. Jalen Carter's developed, Jordan Davis developed. They've gotten the guys on the defensive interior. On the offensive line, you got Mailata and guys like that, Landon Dickerson, guys that they've been bringing along in a system like Kai Becton, who they brought in free agency. They've built that core. The Steelers' offensive line hasn't found that yet. Now, Zach Frazier, good rookie year. Mason McCormick, good rookie year. But certainly they hit their rookie walls towards the end of the season, as Mike Tomlin alluded. Broderick Jones really hasn't put it together all yet. Granted, he hasn't been on the left tackle side that he expects to be. Troy Fautanu hasn't played yet, so we haven't seen that. So I think it's less about getting the mobile quarterback, though I do think that's something they should do, and that's why I think that Justin Fields should be their guy right now. I think it's less about getting the talented playmaker in the backfield. And again, that would help, but they need this offensive line to take a step forward as a collective. This is a big year. They did not let go of Pat Meyer. They said, hey, they're going to stick with him. They still believe in his ability to develop guys. And look at what Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick did this year for the most part. They did a solid job. But this offensive line needs to put it together. That's going to be what makes the difference for them if they want to be like the Ravens or the Eagles. They need this O-line to come together to be playmakers. And I think that with the way that their offense is structured, if they're able to sign Justin Fields and keep him, if they still have Jalen Warren, which they absolutely should, and if they draft a running back in the middle rounds like Damian Martinez or Jadon Blue or Tootin, one of those guys that we've been talking about to pair with Jalen Warren, they could have a running threat that makes it really tough on defenses to stop them if their O-line coalesces, becomes one of these better units because they've been investing into it. So that offensive identity should not be abandoned, because I know some people out there say, oh, it's backwards football. Oh, the Steelers are so stuck in 1940 and da-da-da-da-da. No, they're not. They're just playing. They just don't have the guys yet and the horses to run the way that they want to run. Because look at the teams that were winning a lot. In fact, the Chiefs don't run some high-flying passing offense anymore. They run the ball a lot too, because they've gotten better in the trenches. Now they have Patrick Mahomes that makes it easier to throw the ball, but look at what the Lions did. The Lions didn't overly depend on Jared Goff. They had a balanced running attack. Why? Because their offensive line moved people, and that was a big part of the reason why they were able to run the ball so well, which is why they were able to pass the ball so well. Look at the Eagles. Yes, Jalen Hurts had a great Super Bowl, and he was awesome, but it was all built off of the fact that the Chiefs sold out to stop the run every single time. They just like, Saquon Barkley, you're not going to beat us, and then that allowed the passing game to get one-on-one looks, and Jalen Hurts to say, all right, we're gonna bet on our guys to win there, and that worked. So if you're the Steelers, it's not about abandoning this style. It's about getting it right with the picks and developing those guys. And I think with Zach Frazier, they got to hit. I think Mason McCormick, for a fourth-year guy, they got to hit. They got to see if Broderick Jones can be the guy at left tackle. We still haven't seen him get the chance to play on that side really that much. Troy Fautanu, we haven't seen him at all because he got injured this year. We got to see what they do at the guard with Sayamalu. I think this offensive line needs time to grow into the thing that the Steelers want it to be. It's less about abandoning this identity, because let me tell you right now, if you don't have Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, even though the Ravens do have Lamar Jackson, but if you don't have Patrick Mahomes, you don't have one of those superstar, ridiculous quarterbacks that can just beat teams with their eyes and their arm so consistently, you got to be a team that runs the football well and plays a balanced game and plays physical up front and plays that way. That's necessary in today's game. And because defenses have prioritized getting smaller and quicker and faster so much in the NFL to catch up to all the high passing teams, this is why so many teams are starting to do this, because they're saying, hey, we're going to give up on the motto. If we don't got the quarterback to sling it like your Peyton Manning, don't try to be the quarterback slinging it like your Peyton Manning. Be the team that runs teams over and wins. And that's why I said football is a cyclical game. What goes around comes around. What was something that was popular back then is going to come back around, because teams are going to adjust to what each other do. Defenses back in the day, we're beefing up at linebacker, beefing up on their front. So you had teams like the Patriots, teams like the Colts, saying, all right, we're gonna play a lot quicker underneath passing offense. It's going to stress these pockets in your defense where these guys are going to be uncomfortable in coverage. And so over the years, guys started to prioritize getting faster linebackers. That's what Ryan Shazier was part of the movement for, getting faster coverage linebackers, converting safeties to linebacker, prioritizing getting more slot cornerbacks. That's why cornerbacks became an even bigger priority in the NFL in general. So what happened? Defenses got smaller, they got faster, they got quicker, and it was better to work at it. Look what the Bengals used to do to the Chiefs in the playoffs, back when they were able to beat them at that level. They had a secondary that was able to run with those guys. But now the shoe is coming back on the other foot, because teams are saying, okay, we're going to you've gotten these guys to counter what we do on offense. Now we're going to be a power run offense if we don't have that superstar quarterback. And I think if you have the guys, it works. Go for it. Do it. So that's just my opinion there. I don't think it's a needed change. It's needing to get it right about the players that you get. Last question comes from Josh in Downingtown, PA. Josh, take it away.
This is Josh from Downingtown, PA. Wanted to get your opinion. So what if the Steelers in the first round, I know they're looking at a wide receiver to maybe put next to George Pickens, if they draft Emeka Egbuka, and then in the fourth or fifth round, they go out and get Will Howard, so that you have a starting caliber wide receiver. But then if Will Howard becomes your guy, he has someone that he has a connection with. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. You guys are the best podcast there is. I love hearing talking about Steelers. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. As always, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the air. And thank you, Josh. We appreciate the shout out for being the best podcast out there. We try very hard to get y'all entertainment and to get y'all Steelers talk every single day, Monday through Friday. So let's address that. Emeka Egbuka. I think that Emeka Egbuka would be a heck of a pick for the Steelers. I think he's we played clips of him on this podcast when we were talking to him at the podium. Thinks the game through very well. Obviously, a leader for Ohio State, a guy that you want in your locker room. I think he would be a heck of a pick. And if you got him, or even if you didn't get him, I like Will Howard. I think that regardless if you get Emeka Egbuka, if you can get Will Howard in the fourth round this year, I think that's a win for the Steelers because I look at Will Howard and I see a gutsy quarterback that can make tough throws, that is accountable. I don't think he's a future superstar or even starter. I think he's a potential Mason Rudolph type of guy where like he could probably start for you for some games, give you some tough play, give you some good passes, play in your system, learn your things, and be a bridge guy whenever that day comes, if that day comes and you don't find your future franchise quarterback in the next few years. Or maybe he does become that guy. But I like Will Howard's upside. I think he has a good size. We talked to him for a bit at the Combine. I haven't played his clips yet because we haven't talked about quarterbacks much on this show at the Combine just yet. But I like Will Howard. So whether or not Emeka Egbuka comes to the Steelers should have Will Howard on their roster on their watch list. And I believe they do because I believe he was one of their formal interviews at the Combine. So yeah, that's a good observation by you, Josh. I think it's a good thing there. And hey, it would be nice. Wouldn't it be nice if Emeka Egbuka and Will Howard were both Pittsburgh Steelers? But again, the only reason I push back on Egbuka is because I think that the priority for this team is to get that stud D tackle in the first round, so they can get back to being younger in that group and find a 1-2 punch for the future with Keanu Benton. And again, a really strong rotation with Benton, the rookie that they invest highly in, Cam Hayward, and then maybe a guy like Wharton or Milton Williams to make this a true defensive rotation that's really tough up front for offenses to deal with. So and then go get your wide receiver in the second round this year, like a Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, like a Jack Besh out of TCU, one of those types of guys, or Ilik Yamaner out of Stanford. Get one of those types of guys that can work with George Pickens, be a young guy along with the veteran that they sign in free agency, because I expect them to do that as well. So lots of moves to consider there, but thank you everyone who's been calling into the show. Keep calling. For those who haven't gotten their question answered yet, I do apologize. There's a lot of y'all that call, and it's tough to sort through all of them, but I save all of them on my into my files here, and I try to bring them up when I think it's relevant or when I get a chance to that works with the show. Thanks again to everyone who tunes into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Remember to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe to this channel to get more of those episodes. And remember, we got Mock Draft Monday coming up, and it'll be like our Mock Draft Monday before free agency opens up. So that's going to be the fun part of it. We're going to, if you look for my post on all my social medias, whether it's Twitter or Blue Sky or our Locked On Steelers Facebook group. Those are the places to look for it. At Carter Critiques is my handle in all places. But I'll post it probably sometime tomorrow or Saturday. Just say, hey, post your screenshot. I'll have some rules. Be sure to join in on that. And if you pick an alignment that I think works for what we're talking about in the show, I'm not going to give y'all a hint just yet what it's going to be, but we're going to figure that out later. But if you pick a good lineup or a good mock draft, we'll get your picks talked about on the show, and we'll get you a shout out there as well. Thanks again for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. See you Monday as free agency starts to get underway here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.